This is yours.
Oh, thank you. Stephanie.
This doesn't, okay. Welcome to the Festival of Books. Nice to see everybody here today. I'm sure you've been told already to silence your cell phone, so I won't do it again. We're honored today to have the incredible Patt Morrison and Jared Diamond here today. And there'll be a question and answer period afterwards at approximately 15 minutes. And is there anything else, Pat, that you would like for me to say?
The signing area where it is.
Okay, that'd be a good idea too. The books are upstairs in this building, if you haven't figured that out already. And the signing area will be right across the street, the first street that you come to, okay? And it's signing area 7. Good?
Yep.
And we're ready to go. Thank you.
Thank you. And when the questions come around, Stephanie will be here, and you can come up the center of the aisle, and she'll hold on to the mic for you. And I know you'll have questions for Jared Diamond, who is a professor of geography at UCLA, but actually the compass of his interest is much wider than that, as you know. His book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, with its analysis of cultures achieving technical superiority and why others don't, it has become an integral part of the social sciences canon, of course, a Pulitzer Prize winner, and his book, Collapse, is not far behind. There's a new young people's edition forthcoming of his book, The Third Chimpanzee, which your kids will be able to read. I think it's PG-13, isn't that the movie equivalent of the rating? You may wonder, and he will tell us, how a bird-watching professor became an eminence in the social sciences. You can look to New Guinea for that. Darwin had the Galapagos. Jared Diamond has New Guinea as his field work and his source of study and inspiration. For its many and nuanced cultures, 1 in 7 of the world's languages is located there, and he draws upon this from his new book in the examples that he uses and the conclusion he reaches, the world until yesterday. The idea existed into the 1920s that society was on a continuum. In 1920 or so, the notion that Émile Coué, the philosopher or pop philosopher, put forward, the phrase that every day in every way I am getting better and better, meant that as we looked at traditional societies and cultures, that what was is not as good as what is, and what is not as good as what was going to be. This is why you were able to see poems like Kipling's with the line, lesser breeds without the law. But at the same time, during the Enlightenment, you had the idea of the noble savage. So our sense of our anthropology came into a state of tension with each other, and sorting these things out has been the work of social scientists like Jared Diamond, and we thank him for joining us. Thank you for being here.
Pat, it's always a pleasure to be with you.
And so somewhere between those two poles, the romanticizing of traditional cultures and the idea that any traditional culture is not as good as the present-day culture, is what you explore. You weave back and forth, using as your topic areas several different subjects, including how the elderly are treated, how children are treated. So if maybe you want to first lay out how you came to this premise. So you didn't want to put it on an either or, plus or minus sort of scale, but you did want to deliver some nuances about how each of these cultures, our modern Western culture and some of these traditional cultures, do compare. And, as it says in the book, what we can learn from them.
I'd say that my attitude in general is that of a realist, neither an idealist nor a denigrator. You described it well, Pat, in that attitudes towards traditional societies in our modern societies have fluctuated between two extremes, either regarding them as primitive brutes from whom we have nothing to learn and who should be driven off or assimilated or even killed as quickly as possible. And then at the opposite extreme, the view associated with the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who spoke of the noble savage and regarded traditional people as in harmony with nature, loving, and we have gone downhill. But the fact is that traditional people are people. They make mistakes, they do bad things, they do good things, and the fact is that there's a lot that we can learn, that I personally have learned from my friends in New Guinea.
What, if you could lay out some of the 9 topics that you chose to examine as how each culture deals with them, and really the underlying question of the cultural background to this. A lot of the cultures you study think in terms of the collective, and in the West we think very much in terms of the individual. And that, to me, is as large a framework to set this discussion as anything else.
That's a very good point. Yeah, in traditional societies, they're small scale. Tribes, bands, consist only of a few dozen to a few hundred individuals, so everybody knows everybody else. People don't move around except when they get married. And so you grow up and you spend your life with the people who were your childhood friends. A benefit of that is that old people live out their years surrounded by the friends of their lifetime. And so the loneliness of old age, the disaster area of American life that growing older constitutes, doesn't exist in traditional societies. In the United States, the average American moves every 5 years. So of course you're going to end up distant from your children and your relatives.
And yet, when you talk about some of the other traditions that have to do with the health of the collective versus the individual fate of the elderly, you describe circumstances which reminded me of the Arctic peoples, where you read stories about the elderly who just go out and sit on the ice floe knowing that the end is coming.
Sometimes it's worse than elderly sitting on the ice floe. There are societies in which old people die or are killed. Sometimes they're encouraged to go sit on the ice floe. In other cases, they're killed or abandoned. This happens in a minority of societies, but particularly nomadic societies. If you're going to move camp every day and you come to a stage in life where you can no longer walk quickly or you can no longer walk at all, it's not that these are evil people. What on earth are they going to do? There's no choice except to leave the old people. And the old people did it to their parents, and they know what's going to happen to them. But in sedentary traditional societies, the situation of older people is, as far as friendship is concerned, much more satisfying than in American society.
When you talk about the idea of a small unit of a few hundred or even maybe 1,500 people, what was that that breaking point number that you write about, where you have to pass from a traditional culture into a culture that has to have other mechanisms because you have so many people, you can't deal face to face with some of these transactions, whether they're commercial or religious anymore. How big a society is a society that has to make that transition?
It's Pat, the size of a high school where you know everybody's name as compared to a high school where you don't know everybody's name. I've heard...
High school's the most savage place I can think of, so...
Well, I'm told that high school principals, if the high school has fewer than 400 students, the principal knows everybody's name. And if the high school has 1,000 students, the principal certainly does not know everybody's name. And similarly with traditional societies, up to a few hundred, you don't have a chief, you don't have a king, you can't support a king, you don't need a king, because you can make your decisions face to face. But once you have a couple of thousand people, you've got to have a leader, because a couple of thousand people can't gather around a fire and reach a decision.
The example you give at the beginning of the book, and we could apply it just as easily to this room, is that you're standing in an airport and looking at people who are complete strangers to one another, even though they inhabit perhaps the same part of the world, who 100 years ago might have been at war with one another, but in this airport, they all manage to get along. They know what they're supposed to do, what their roles and their jobs are, and they accede to an authority that may not have been of their choosing, but there is a self-interest to them in doing what you're supposed to do at an airport. Can you detail that and how it teases out in the rest of the book?
My book does begin with a scene at an airport, the main airport of Papua New Guinea, but just to get a sense of that scene, as I look out at this audience today, the vast majority of you I've never seen before, and Pat